today's show, we're talking to Chris Emery, documentary filmmaker of the recently released award-winning film A Nobel Lie about the Oklahoma City bombing in 1995 of the Murrah Federal building. You can find the DVD of the film at anobellie.com or infowars.com. He has appeared several times on InfoWars with Alex Jones and is currently producing 2 upcoming documentaries. Hello, Chris. How are you? Welcome to the show.
Well, thank you.
Hi, Chris.
I appreciate the invite.
You're so nice.
Yeah, no, we're very honored to have you.
Exactly.
Yeah, it's a very big honor for us. And so we both saw the documentary and we found it excellent. You've won a lot of awards for it, which I think are very, very deserving. But it's a very disturbing subject, and people seem to forget that this is the second largest. The Oklahoma City bombing was the second largest act of terrorism in American history, second only to 9/11. It killed 168 people. 19 of those were children, and wounded 800. Almost destroyed about a third of the building, of the Murrah building. And to briefly tell us, what is the official story of the Oklahoma City bombing?
The official story is that only one perpetrator by the name of Timothy McVeigh allegedly pulled up to the front of the Murrah building on the morning of April 19, 1995, and blew up the building with 12 50-gallon plastic barrels full of ammonium nitrate and fuel oil shortly after 9 o'clock with the method of a hand-lit fuse from the cab of the truck, which was connected to some type of a detonation device in the back, and all 12 barrels blew up, not all at once, but in sequence, so they wouldn't cancel each other out. And that explosion proceeded to take down 1/3 of the 8th Murrah Federal building, killing 169 victims, 5 of whom were actually died within about 2 weeks after the bombing of their serious fatal injuries.
Timothy McVeigh was a veteran as well, right? And a lot of people don't know that there was actually a co-conspirator who served a life prison sentence, Terry Nichols, correct? Who's Terry Nichols?
Terry Nichols was actually a former Army buddy of Tim McVeigh. And we also had a third co-conspirator by the name of Michael Fortier, who rolled on his buddies Tim McVeigh and Terry Nichols, coming up with a completely cockamamie story about how the whole case came down. And he lied on the stand, perjured himself well over 12 times, and pandered the official story for the U.S. Prosecutor's Office, and got off light. He served, I believe, just a little over 10 years of a 12-year sentence, and then was immediately put in the witness protection program. Nobody, even his parents, have no idea where he is to this day.
Wow. Yeah, most people have no idea.
So I'm just curious. I wanted to ask, when the Oklahoma City bombing happened, where were you? What were you doing when you received notice that this happened?
Living in Austin, Texas at the time, working for my dad, and I remember coming into his office in the break room, and it was shortly after 9 o'clock, and the secretaries were in the break room having the morning coffee, talking about the recap of what happened the day before and so forth. And it was, of course, it was a Wednesday morning, and they were crying, and I said, "Wow, what's going on?" And I immediately turned around. I'll never forget walking into the break room, looking to my left on the television, and there was the aerial shot, the infamous aerial shot taken by, I believe it was Channel 9 out of Tulsa, the helicopter, and just doing the complete 180 pan shot of the building. And I thought, holy cow, what happened? I thought it was a gas explosion, and then all of a sudden, you start hearing the truck bomb, or the car bomb, and then the van, and then the truck. It slowly built up to the fanciful narrative that we all came to know as the official story. But I had no interest in the case at the time. I was back in '95, and I had other things, more pressing things on my mind at the time.
And so when did you become interested in the story, and how did you start researching it? What were you doing at the time?
I actually stumbled across it through a friend of mine that was living in Fort Worth, Texas. He had approached me, knowing my background as an investigative journalist. I worked for CBS as a contract employee for 4 years. And he had handed me a tape. It was about 2 hours and 45 minutes of the raw, unedited footage of the bombing taken by a lot of the stringer cameramen and news personnel, ironically, they were at a prayer breakfast meeting less than 3 blocks from the Murrah building at the big convention center downtown. A lot of the governor was there and the mayor and so forth, a lot of the big city leaders. And, of course, they were shocked when they felt the multiple explosions coming out of the building. The news personnel ran up there and just rolling this footage, and it was pretty graphic. There were some parts that certainly would not have been shown on television. And I looked at basically the tape and some of the comments coming from law enforcement and search and rescue personnel, and I knew immediately that there was a lot of information that was being hidden from the networks by choice or not by choice. And the story had to be really just started from square one and vetted out. And we had to, as a film crew and researchers and all of the people that knew that there was something horribly wrong with this case, we really wanted to put together a storyline that's presenting the official narrative and then presenting the facts that we found out and then have the viewer decide. So that was our goal with the movie, and I believe we accomplished that goal. And with the response we've had, I think that's come back to us tenfold.
Yeah, definitely.
I was just curious, because personally, while watching this film, I found it deeply disturbing how the government has just gone to great lengths to protect themselves. They commit like abominable, despicable acts, like brainwashing and murder and blackmail. And before you started researching this, were you aware what they were capable of before you were doing research on this documentary?
Very good question, and yes, I was. I certainly wasn't cavalier or naive or headstrong on getting into situations that I knew I wouldn't be able to get myself out of. I had the honor of meeting Charles Key, who was the head of the Oklahoma City Bombing Investigation Committee. Very interesting story there. I'll give you a quick recap. His secretary, Sandra Day, worked for him in the state capitol as a state representative. She had resigned and taken a job with the federal government working in the Murrah building. And I believe she was there for about 10 months. And she was killed in the bombing, the morning of the bombing. And it was Charles knew her parents very well through the church they went to, and they approached him about 2 weeks after the bombing. And they said, look, we're getting one story about the murder of our daughter from the county sheriff and the Oklahoma City Police Department, and a completely different story from the FBI. Please, would you do anything in your official capacity? And as constituents in your district, we would like to know what happened to our daughter. And that's where the ball started rolling. And that was about 2 weeks after the bombing. And then he finally was able to get the committee together about a month after the bombing. But he pulled me aside. The first time I met him was in the summer of 2000. I drove up from Fort Worth, about a 3.5-hour drive. And I met with him, and he says, look, I just want to tell you up front, this is not an easy case. You may be threatened, either directly or indirectly, so are you fully prepared to deal with that? And I told him yes. And, it was my prior experience, the case I was researching before I got into Oklahoma City, TWA 800, I experienced some of that harassment, so I wasn't coming into this completely blind.
Mm.
The good thing about, when you work for the truth, and you know that you're headed on the right course, you have a lot more support than negative support, positive support versus negative support. And I've had a lot of members of law enforcement, retired, active, approach me completely out of the blue, whether I'd be out in public or by email or by phone and say, hey, we really appreciate what you're doing. I can't come out and directly support you, but I will keep you posted if there's anything in the back channels of people that I know that want to do harm to you. And that's really come back and helped us out. So hopefully that was the answer that you were looking for, but that's actually experience.
I know you just said, can I just ask this one question, April? I want to piggyback on this one. I know you said that you have received a lot of support, but have you ever had any people, because, given how evil the government has proven to be, I think it's sometimes hard for the general public to admit that their trust of the government has just been completely trampled on, and I was just wondering, have you ever received any backlash from the victims? Maybe somebody that's not necessarily trying to stop what you're trying to do, but being attacked by victims, calling you a liar, saying that you're the problem instead of the solution,
Yes, we have. Luckily, it's been a minimum. There are two or three that I would prefer not to name over the interview now, but they've come. It's okay. It's a good question, and I appreciate you asking that. The staff of the Oklahoma City National Memorial knows me well. In fact, as they say, persona non grata. I go there, and I'm immediately surrounded by, within about 10 or 12 feet, by 2 or 3 security personnel that think that I'm going to cause problems and so forth. I bring my film colleagues along, media colleagues, and pretty much point out the flaws of their narratives. They've got 3 or 4 different narratives of the story going on at once. It's really a very odd and confusing storyline, but that's their deal. They never vetted it out for fact. They just want to pander to the government story. But getting back to the harassment, I've gotten some pretty colorful emails and voicemail messages, profane and otherwise. But I just, I say, okay, they're human beings, whether they're playing on emotion. Certainly not basing any of their claims on fact. They're open to their opinion. Now, if they were to threaten me personally or physically, then I would have to call law enforcement. And I have members of law enforcement in the Oklahoma City Police Department that have offered to step forward immediately, any time of the day, if I needed any help. Luckily, I've never had to take them up on their offer. So
that's nice.
It's been a very odd kind of a roller coaster, up and down, more ups and downs since I moved here in 2003 to work on this film. So you really get a good gauge, and you get to put your thumb on human nature and how things really work. It's been a very eye-opening experience.
I bet. Mm-hmm. So what is a Nobel Lie? What does that mean? Why did you name the film A Nobel Lie?
That was actually to the credit of our director, James Lane. It's Plato, one of the books that Plato had put together centuries ago. And it's based on the fact that you have the power structure of society, whether it be high government or even local government. They want to present a lie to maintain order within society, even though it flies right in the face of truth. And so we took that as more of a subtle hint that, look, this is the Nobel Lie, the official narrative that you folks have known all of these years. As a film crew and all of the information we've come upon, we want to present what actually happened to the best of our knowledge. And on the heavy side, like I said, we did not want to remember the deaths of the victims in a lie, and this is our best effort, put our best foot forward to make sure that didn't happen.
Wow. I'm curious. How would you say that the Oklahoma City bombing and September 11th are related to each other? There's a relation, but we know. But how would you explain that to the listeners? Because It's
a good question. Let me do the best I can to recap that. Both were, of course, state-sponsored terrorism. It's unfortunate. And when I say state-sponsored terrorism, what we found out with the Oklahoma City bombing, ladies, is that it was a rogue element within the United States government that chose to pull this case off. I mean, that's not even up for debate anymore. The documents we've been able to obtain from trustworthy sources within the State Department, within various agencies that we had no idea even existed. I mean, we know of the BATF and of the FBI and the CIA, Department of Defense and Naval Intelligence. Take that group and then pretty much have a parallel set of agencies that nobody even knows about. That's what's going on. And it was that parallel set of agencies, some elements within that, very criminal, very sick, just very dark heart people that chose to pull this case off. And then you amplify that. You exponentially increase that, and that's what you have with September 11th. It does exist, people. This is not fantasy. It's not based on conjecture or rumor or internet conversation. This is based on fact. That's the way some elements of the United States government and the world government work. Well, we bring that back to a local basis here in Oklahoma City. And so the connection between Oklahoma City and 9/11, we have perpetrators that were actually involved with World Trade Center 93, Oklahoma City, and 9/11. It was just an increase, an escalation of the body count, of the severity, the climax of the, how you put it, the impact, mental, psychological, physical. So it was just a stepping stone to ratchet up the control and the alleged threat of terror. That was all manufactured. It was all put together in the back corridors of the Pentagon and of offices that, like I said, of agencies that we never even knew existed.
And so getting back to the case of the Oklahoma City bombing, so just the details of that which you talk about in your film, there was a lot of suppression of information, a lot of suppression of documentation in the trials of Timothy McVeigh and Terry Nichols and in the investigation itself, including there were pictures of the truck that you'd mentioned at the beginning of the show, the Ryder truck that the bomb was supposedly implanted in. There were people exiting the truck, and the people in the jury weren't allowed to see this, right? And then they had one of the members of the jury, Poppy Helderberg, kind of stood out to me because he was somebody who I don't think most of the people know that this guy was actually on the jury, and he exposed that they had basically been threatened and had suppression of information. And so tell us a little bit about that, about the flaws in the case and how they sort of suppressed a lot of the evidence.
Well, it was a very calculated and very measured approach. We found out that within 48 hours of the bombing, Jamie Gorelick, who was a deputy attorney general under Hillary Clinton in the Clinton administration, we say under Hillary Clinton because pretty much she took her orders from Hillary versus Bill. And then you got Eric Holder, who's rearing his ugly head these days with various other cases. It was Jamie Gorelick that was on the speakerphone, and this is something we couldn't include in the movie, with the Oklahoma County District Attorney's office downtown. And she was on the speakerphone, not calmly speaking, but yelling, very boisterous, at it was the DA, the top attorneys in the office and so forth, and top investigators, telling them how this case was going to be investigated. Now, that is the height of criminal conduct, if there ever is any. Why would you tell a local district attorney how to investigate a case that literally blew up a building, less than 4 blocks from their house, if there wasn't a motive to cover up things? This was not a disgruntled GI coming in and just driving up a truck and blowing up a building. That is a fanciful and completely patently false storyline in and of itself. But we found out that there were, I'm trying to answer your question here in piecemeal, bear with me here.
No problem.
The top authorities from all of the government agencies that flew into Oklahoma City from Washington, from Andrews Air Force Base within 4 hours of the bombing. And then some of those top dogs were with the agencies that we never knew existed. We were able to get who came in from the flight manifest from sources at Tinker Air Force Base, coming in on Learjets. They came here, Johnny on the spot, knowing full well that this was an international case. It was horrendous. They literally got their butt kicked. They got cold cocked. And they were very upset. And they brought in some of the top, international intelligence investigators from all over the world. They were flying in from outside of the United States and coming to ground zero here. So the documents showing that the counter-narrative, or the official narrative was false, were suppressed. There was what was called a writ of mandamus that Timothy McVeigh's attorney, Stephen Jones, submitted to Judge Maish. It was 167 pages, and I got to read through that. Incredible document, showing that there were actually elements from the Irish Republican Army, from terrorist groups in South America, from Mexico. There were about 4 different groups literally lined up to make sure that this case went down and that the building was going to be completely leveled. Luckily, that didn't happen. There would have been more casualties. But to answer your case, there's a lot of people who were embarrassed, miscommunication, ego wars, turf wars, intel was not shared, and we saw that, like I said, exponentially increased with 9/11. So Oklahoma City was just a microcosm of what happened on 9/11. And that's why the documents were suppressed. They were never allowed to enter the court. And it was Judge Maish who was the point man on that. And he was threatened. We found that through back channels and various sources, that if he did not throw the rope on this, that there was going to be hell to pay for the judge.
Right. And just to tag on to that, you mentioned Hillary Clinton, but there was also a connection to some of the documents from the Whitewater incident that had actually been transferred to the Murrah building just prior to the incident and just prior to the bombing that had been destroyed, correct?
Well, they actually had survived the bombing, but they were hauled off site. In fact, we found out a couple of nights ago through someone who interviewed for our next movie. He gave us the skinny on that. The documents in the Murrah building, some of them were connected to the highly criminal Whitewater case. It was a money laundering scheme that the Clintons were involved with for years in Arkansas through a big real estate, the White River real estate scandal. And they were laundering drug money, both for international drug cartels. And this is a criminal operation that the CIA had going on for years when Clinton was Attorney General and Governor of Arkansas. But anyway, that hearing for that case was supposed to be coming up in May of 1995. Well, we found out through a former federal agent that when a sitting president is due to be indicted and called a congressional hearing, that the documents they're going to be used in that hearing, it's against, I don't know if it's some type of a constitutional law or what the case is, but it's a very arcane law that says that it cannot be stored in the same state that the sitting president. So by default, Oklahoma City was the closest federal building. New Orleans is farther away, Dallas is farther away, and Chicago was farther away. So it was the closest federal building. A.P. Murrah building got it by default. And they had to be stored here, so there was no tampering. Nothing could be altered during discovery process and so forth. So it's very peculiar that they would be stored here, and the building was nearly leveled. And we found out that
how convenient.
Yeah, hauled off site. And the search and rescue operations, and Don Browning touches upon that in the movie, the retired Oklahoma City police officer, said that they were hauled off site. Well, we found out they were taken across the street to the old post office, which was shut down, of course, because of the horrendous damage sustained there. And there was a special room that was constructed with thick plywood and padlocks and so forth. And it was about 2 weeks after the bombing that those documents were hauled off. And a friend of someone that we interviewed for the movie was an eyewitness. He was asked by an FBI agent that was the minder, basically watching the operation, to put his video camera down and to shut it off until these individuals that came up with vans that had no windows on them. They were in BDUs, no letters on their jackets, submachine guns. Why would you have that kind of security detail if those documents were of some value? And you found out that they were the Whitewater documents that were stored in the Murrah building.
Wow.
It's just, I mean, they just go so deep. They're just so evil. Anyway.
We liken it. Some of our colleagues in the film industry asked us, well, what's it like living in this? It's like being in the middle of a really poorly written episode of The Twilight Zone, and it just keeps rolling. Don't stay cut. These people think they can get away with this. It's really completely over the top.
Talking more about some of the flaws, there was actually a lot of witnesses, people that were in the building at the time, who said they felt like an earthquake-like vibration prior to the truck bomb going off. Correct?
Yeah.
So there's evidence that there was actually several bombs going off inside the building before the truck bomb even went off.
Yes, that's correct. Good question. I talked to Dr. Jack Govan, who worked for the Department of Agriculture and also worked for the Border Customs Department out at the airport, and he was in charge of analyzing any shipments that came in for plants and so forth that had to be quarantined. Anyway, his office was up on the 5th floor of the Murrah building overlooking the nursery, which would have been on the southwest corner. And he's a veteran of the Vietnam War. I got to talk to Jack about a year after I got here. His office was obviously moved over to a temporary location, and he put his office back together. Basically, he set it up identical the way it was in the Murrah building, so it was surreal to see. It was almost like a movie set. And he said, no, this is where I was sitting, this is where my desk was, this is where the Venetian blinds were. He was on the phone facing, and the glass on his office was from floor to ceiling. And they had Venetian blinds hanging vertical. He's on the phone talking to a colleague of his about 9 o'clock. And he said the building started shaking, and his Venetian blinds are going from left to right. Well, as a veteran of the Vietnam War, he immediately took cover. And also living in California for several years, he thought it was an earthquake.
Mm-hmm.
Went under his desk, and then all of a sudden, all hell broke loose. He was 12 feet from the drop-off point on his part of the fifth floor. Only two of his colleagues survived: the secretary and his boss. The rest of the staff was crushed. And,
Jesus!
It's horrible. He got up, and then he heard mortar rounds. It sounded like mortar rounds going off, and it was the gas tanks of the vehicles across the street exploding one by one. And he said it brought flashbacks of his training and his service out in the jungles of Vietnam. And that's a whole other story in and of itself.
Right.
That certainly wouldn't have happened with ANFO. And that's more on the ordnance and the shockwave and the flash wave attenuation that came out of the building, more on the scientific end of. But, you hear these Jack Goldman, and you hear Jane Graham on the 9th floor. She's in a Windows 95 class. Remember, this is April of 95. They're in a class up on the 9th floor. There's 12 of them, plus the teacher learning how to use this new software. It felt like an earthquake there, and they all hit the floor. Well, they're 7 feet from the drop-off. Luckily, none of those 13 people died. They were on the south side of the building. Pretty much from center line to the north end of the building, you would have pretty much got crushed. There were very few people that survived that drop. I think maybe 2 or 3. And then, of course, you have V.Z. Lawton, who's below the group, Jane Graham. He's on the 8th floor signing some papers, and V.Z. goes through that in the movie. He gets knocked in the head by falling debris from the floor that Jane Graham and her colleagues are standing on. He's knocked out cold. Then the truck bomb goes off. So you have Jack Goldman, who's number 1. Then you have 13 people on the 9th floor. That brings it up to 14 people. Then VZ, who's 15 people. All of them sustained or experienced something that clearly showed that the building was coming off down at least 5 to 8 seconds before the truck bomb even went off. So that right there completely pulls all of the underpinnings of the official narrative completely out.
Right, and they actually even found bombs, right?
Yeah.
I mean, there were potentially 4 bombs, but there were 3 that were actually located, correct?
Yes, ma'am, and we found out from some other sources that there were quite a few more. There were.
Oh, what? Yeah. Yeah.
The entire motive of who set this up was to bring that entire building down, and it was set apart 10 minutes. There were timing switches that were found, mercury switches that were damaged in the initial blast, that were set for 10 minutes after 9. So the motive is if you blow up the first part, the walking wounded, search and rescue, law enforcement would come in, and then you pretty much level the building on them. Luckily, that second phase never happened. You never heard that in the official narrative. They didn't want that to come out.
And I think in the official story, too, they were saying that the bomb was made of ammonium nitrate. But I know one of the people that you interviewed, he said that, that was impossible because in an ammonium nitrate bomb, you wouldn't even be able to get close to it, and rescue any of the survivors until maybe about an hour and a half because you can smell it, right?
That's correct. It was the nitrous gas. In fact, I got to talk to Carlton Armstrong, who was the mastermind behind the Sterling Hall bombing in Madison, Wisconsin. He was shocked at the information that we found out about the Oklahoma City bombing. He said there's physically, financially, and mentally, there's no way that McVeigh Nichols could have pulled this off. He said it was a horrendous amount of damage compared to what he put together. And I went to school in Madison. I was a student there, and I remember the Sterling Hall bombing, even as a 10-year-old. And it was very odd to be able to go back and contact him and sit down with him not once but twice in the matter of 3 weeks. I flew back and forth from here to Madison. And he laid it all out. It was very eerie. And 3 weeks before that, I had flown out to visit with General Parton in Washington, D.C. at his home in Alexandria. So you have the brilliant scientific testimony of a 35-year veteran of the U.S. Air Force in charge of the armament lab at the Pentagon for 18 years. And then fast forward 3 weeks, and I'm sitting with a convicted criminal that is saying the same thing, completely countered to the official narrative, and I thought, that's it. I mean, there's really, this pretty much seals it right here. They never talk to each other, but they're telling me the same story. One that designed ordnance for the military and one that actually put an explosive device together that took down half of Sterling Hall. That we touched upon both of those in the movie. So what it is, we're just trying to encourage the listener and the audience to research this even more.
Yeah.
And don't accept the official narrative. It's completely false.
With anything now, not even just this story, but like other stuff too, now, I mean, because if people are going to lie to you about this, the government will lie to you about this, they'll lie to you about anything.
As a mass destruction, I mean, it just goes on and on and on.
Oh, definitely. I had a question. So Dr. Louis Jolyon West, an expert on mind control, was reported to have visited Timothy McVeigh like countless times while he was in jail. So I really don't think that's a coincidence. And I was just curious, do you have any other additional evidence to add to the fact that Timothy McVeigh might be a Manchurian candidate?
Well, basically, Al Gore spilled the beans on that whole thing, and that's where the arrogance and the hubris comes out. You have the Vice President of the United States in a little-known press conference, the dedication of he was here for the memorial, I believe, a couple of weeks after the bombing, along with President Clinton, that whole entourage. And he's saying, we're going to bring in Jolyon West to help with the victims' family members and survivors. That's a huge red flag.
Yeah, right.
Is the worst of the worst as far as mind control.
Definitely.
Why would the Vice President be bragging about that at a press conference? So we just about fell off our chair when we saw that news clip. But to answer your question, yes, Timothy McVeigh was working for the CIA when the bombing happened. That's not even up for debate. I mean, the documents prove it right there. He was on the payroll. He was a professional assassin. A lot of people don't know that he was actually a sharpshooter for the security detail for General Schwarzkopf in Persian Gulf War I. He was a marksman, one of the best. You don't ask to be, you're not appointed to a security detail for the commander of all of the Allied forces in Persian Gulf I if you don't have your act together. And he was taken from that role and sheepdick. He was taken out, allegedly didn't make special forces. Okay, well, of course he didn't make special forces. He was put into a completely different segment of the CIA that very little people knew about. He was gone off the map for 4.5 months. That the FBI had absolutely no idea where he was. Now, when the FBI doesn't know where you were, that means that you're really deep cover. They lost. So anyway, to answer your question, he was a sleeper. He was a trigger. His behavior before, during, and after the bombing was completely bizarre, and it pretty much led us to the conclusion that there were actually two teams pulling this off, and there was a stunt double or lookalike of McVeigh, because he couldn't have been at two places at once. The various testimony, and we found out later on that the reason that that's set up is that when you go to trial to prosecute the patsy, or the person that you want to be convicted, put in prison and in death row, that's done on purpose to completely destroy any credibility of the witnesses, so you can focus in on the bogus story. And that's exactly what happened in Oklahoma City.
So I remember doing the pre-interview that you're working on another film coming out, and it's going to be on MK Ultra, Mind Control Project. So according to your research, I don't know if you're still researching it or if you've finished researching it, but I'm just curious, what is the MO of a Manchurian candidate? I think you listed a couple things, like being in the government, right? Is that like one of them? Working for the government? Are there any other things that you can add to that list?
Well, basically, they're the human version of a robot. Mentally, they can be switched off and on. It's very chilling and very sobering to see, and it's been going on for hundreds of years. The top British Army has been doing, not to the sophistication level that we do now, but the technique has been perfected over the years. So as far as a Manchurian candidate, you have Oswald, you have McVeigh, even some of these like the underwear bomber and so forth. These guys are brainwashed in certain ways to carry out a certain act, whether it be completely pulling off the crime or only a segment of the crime. We found out, to answer your question further here in Oklahoma City, that there were certain people that knew of this operation, but only in a very compartmentalized manner. They only to a certain point, and then somebody else would carry on the task after that. So that was it's a classic case of what they call plausible deniability. They wouldn't have been culpable of the crime because they only did a very small part of it and didn't know about the others. And they honestly, they wouldn't have. They wouldn't have been perjuring themselves on the stand. So to answer your question about Manchurian candidate, yes, that's how it works. It does exist. It's refined to a very it's an amazing art that a lot of these controllers have. This gentleman out in Aurora, Colorado, he just completely controlled from day one. And then you have the shooting with the Congresswoman Gifford last year and outside of Tucson. That was a Manchurian candidate. So you see a lot of these. We have a better trained eye on it as a film crew, and it's like, my God, here we go again. This is so obvious and so in our face.
I was just curious, since we're talking about Manchurian candidates and stuff too. What is your opinion on the Colorado shooting that just happened in Aurora a few weeks ago?
I think it's set up. In fact, there's information coming out now. The doctor that treated him for up to 2 years before this incident happened, he was a graduate student there in Colorado. She was the top. She's pretty much a protege of Jolly and West, but at Lackland Air Force Base in San Antonio. That is probably the worst as far as integrity and morality and what goes on there. The worst domestic mind control base, aside from the CIA headquarters in Langley, next to Guantanamo Bay. If you put through any type of program, or you're going through any psychological program at Lackland, heads up. I mean, that's there again, it's a huge red flag. And she admitted that she treated this guy for 2 years. And in fact, she was censured before the medical board in Colorado, state medical board, for administering mind-controlled drugs, psychotropic drugs, to herself, family members, and to this particular individual illegally, writing out prescriptions without the authority to do so, and to the extent that she had the authority to do so. So that really throws up a lot of red flags there. And I'm not believing the official story for a minute. I have no reason to believe it.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah, and same with the Arizona shooting. When that happened, I had red flags right away because I sort of felt that kind of thing coming. It's kind of like the same thing happens over and over again. There's a problem, reaction, solution, and the solution is always sort of like more suppression of our rights, which happened after 9/11, and it happened after Oklahoma City. There was the Anti-Terrorism and Effective Death Penalty Act of 1996. Now tell us about that and how that came into law after the Oklahoma City bombing.
That was an omnibus bill. That's correct. It was floundering in the House for about 8 months. Oklahoma City happened, and this is how insidious the members of Congress that wanted this to pass, how insidious they are. They bring the victims' family members and survivors, a select group, and have a press conference with then Senator Don Nichols from Oklahoma, who completely just rolled over on this, refused to do any investigation on the case. I have no respect for the guy. But he brings this whole entourage into Washington. They put him up at the first-rate hotels and fly him on a charter plane in. And they're rolling him out at this press conference in front of the Capitol complex saying, oh, we want this bill passed. Well, it still floundered in the House and the Senate. And it was finally passed about 10 months after that. Bill Clinton and his administration were furious at the length and the amount of time it took, because there were actually members of Congress to say, you know what, we've already got enough protection under the Constitution. We don't need this as a pile-on. And Oklahoma City was a pawn in the past. And then, of course, you had the Patriot Act, which completely dwarfed beyond the...
Right, and then after, or just prior to this whole Aurora thing happening, there was a treaty on the tables about basically the suppression of gun rights or gun control treaty, correct? And I heard you guys talking about this, I think, on InfoWars about a week ago. Is that right?
Yes, that's correct. And luckily that was tabled. Other nations that did not want to sign up on it, and that'll flounder for how many years now. But it's really unfortunate that have an incident like this happen. And I really, my heart goes out to the victims' family members and survivors. It's just horrible. You do not want anybody through something like that. So I'm not disrespecting, but I do disrespect the investigators and the official narrative. They're just patently lying to us and insulting our intelligence.
Right.
It's you look at this whole thing and gun control actually, for the powers that be that want to take our gun rights away, flew right in their face. Gun sales went up, and it just more solidified and underscored the resolve of the people that want to own their firearms here. I lived in Australia for 2.5 months, and I was astonished at the the fact that nobody could own guns over there. And they looked at me like I had a horn grown out of my head when I said, you know what, I have a 12-gauge shotgun at the house and a couple of handguns, illegal here in Oklahoma, for protection, and I have the right to own them. And they were just astonished.
Whoa, you work. That's awesome. Yeah, wow.
You know, I've since gotten rid of them. In fact, I sold them before I moved. But I have a right to own that here in Oklahoma. And I believe there are 17 states that you can do that without running into any problems. Mm-hmm. And I can't imagine having that right taken away from me. And that's why we still have the limited rights that we have, because we have the right to own a gun. We're not going to have people coming door to door taking those away from us.
Oh, yeah, they take our guns. That's it. You know, it's
right.
It's like it's deplorable, and especially just with the stuff that the government is pulling right now, and the fact that people are starting to wake up to it. This is our only, you know, they're trying to like curb our speech, they're like putting up free speech zones. I mean, this is crazy, you know.
Right. Exactly.
So yeah, I mean, I wasn't into guns. And I don't like guns to this day. I don't like them, but you know, if I feel the need to protect myself, you know, so you know, yeah.
So you're working on 2 new documentaries. One of them we sort of touched on before is about MK Ultra mind control, and then you also are doing one about Terrence Yeaky?
Officer Yeaky. That we're going to hold off on that one until this movie's released. Got a lot of resources we got to apply to this one, but that will be an upcoming feature-length documentary. It will concentrate on the brutal torture murder of Officer Yeaky, and he has an 8-minute segment in the movie. It's very, very heart-wrenching to go through that story. I got to know the family, the mom, the sisters, the 94-year-old grandmother, a couple of the ex-brother-in-laws. It's just what that family went through was just horrible. So anyway, did you have any particular questions on the case?
Well, yeah, I wanted you to just explain who he was, and the official story on that is that he committed suicide, but you know, we obviously don't believe that, and it sounds impossible. So I just wanted you to describe who he was and what happened to him.
Officer Yeaky worked for the Canadian County Sheriff's Department. That's county just west of Oklahoma County, where Oklahoma City is located. And he was also an Army veteran. Served in actually he was an MP in the first Gulf War. Took a leave of absence from the police department, and served just 2 years, and then came back. And then he was a 7-year veteran of the Oklahoma City Police Department. He was issuing a traffic ticket 4 blocks away from the Murrah building when the bombing happened. He dropped his ticket book, told the girl that he was issuing it to, whom we were able to communicate through a third party. She was terrified even to speak about it on the movie. But anyway, she told us that he didn't issue traffic tickets, jumped in his black and white squad car and sped up to the Murrah building and started pulling people out immediately. He was the first member of the Oklahoma City Police Department to arrive. And he would later intimate in letters and certain papers and reports that he would put together that what he saw in the unexploded ordnance and the conduct of the ATF and government agencies that were there immediately with BDUs and body armor and everything, they weren't in the building, but they knew that something was going to happen. He said the official story made no sense at all. And he did see the unexploded ordnance. He submitted a 13.5-page report to his commanding officer, Lieutenant Joanne Randall, who found out her credibility is highly in high question because she's just a very controlling individual. But that's another story for another time. But he submitted this report, and it was cut down to a page and a half. And he was furious. He says, I'm not going to lie for anybody. I show up in the morning, I have my badge and my sidearm on, and I came here to serve the people of Oklahoma City, and you're asking me to lie about the worst case of terrorism in the history of the country, which took place, in my backyard, so to speak. My friends, my close associates were killed in this, and I'm not going to lie about it. Well, they harassed him, they meaning operatives from the police department, harassed him for a year and 3 weeks. And we found out through back channels that there were people that were brought into town to take care of the dirty deed, that he murdered a mile and a half from the front gate of the El Reno Penitentiary, That's 32 miles due west of Oklahoma City, and left in a farm field to die. It was horrible, just absolutely horrible what happened to him.
And he felt, I mean, he knew he was being trailed and that people were kind of after him, right? So wasn't he was going to get the documents from his mini storage where he had them secured, correct?
Yeah, Kingfisher, which is about less than 40 miles from here, another miles kind of the northwest of where he was killed. And he was on his way to meet an associate to get those documents and then meet for dinner, and he never made it. We've estimated, our best estimate, that he was murdered between 8 a.m. and 1 p.m. that day. His vehicle was found at 6 p.m. Oklahoma City Police Department. This was going into Canadian County, which is outside of the jurisdiction of Oklahoma City Police, but out of courtesy, and since it was one of their officers, they were called. There was a search party out there, and they knew that this is just completely upside down. But they were told to lie about it, cover it up, and unfortunately it occurred on federal land. It was on farmland that was leased to a local farmer not far from the prison because there was Bureau of Prison land. So the FBI had jurisdiction on that. Well, that just made matters worse. We all knew what happened with the Oklahoma City bombing. And so anyway, our efforts are going to try to investigate that even in more detail, bring out a lot of the exculpatory evidence that was never presented. And there was no autopsy. I mean, just one red flag after another. We were able to obtain the official report from the Emery's office, and other people have come forward since then, retired law enforcement. A great amount of information, but it's a horrendous storyline, and we're going to try to be as respectful and professional as we can and present that in the movie.
Right. Yeah, and was there anyone else also that had kind of a suspicious sort of suiciding as a result of their investigation of the Oklahoma City bombing?
No, the fact that Dr. Charles Chumley was Terry's back doctor, and he treated Terry for lower back problems for, I believe, a year and a half before the bombing. And that was, I think it may have been due to a sports injury. Terry was a very talented basketball player that would have done very well in the pros if he chose not to pursue the Army and the law enforcement career. So Dr. Chumley was treating his back. Dr. Chumley, the morning of the bombing, his clinic was it's on 18th Street, where buildings up. It was about 13 blocks north. And I got this story from Dr. Chumley's son, who did not want to come on camera, only spoke to me twice on phone, was scared to talk to me anymore. But I respected the fact he wanted his privacy. Dr. Chumley shows up with a Ford Esquire station wagon loaded with all of the sutures and medical supplies and stuff from his clinic, races down to the Murrah building, and he saw at least three, not one, not two, but at least three ATF agents getting into clean BDU's body armor before they go into the building. And they asked the doctor to make them look like they were in the building injured, putting mercurochrome and different sutures and bandages on to make them look like they were injured. And he says, hell no, I'm a doctor. I'm not going to be doing that, trying to portray a false storyline for you guys. He says, I could get called before the medical examiner review board, and for one, and number two, it's just not the right thing to do. Well, they were pissed at him. They were really pissed off. And they knew that he wasn't going to lie for anybody. Well, ironically, coincidentally, he's Terry's back doctor. Terry and Dr. Chumley got together and compared notes over the following months. And they said, man, this thing stinks to high heaven. And what Terry saw coming in as the traffic officer and a beat officer, and what Dr. Chumley saw as a doctor, and they were matching up their stories. So anyway, later that year, in August of 1995, this is very unfortunate. I got to talk to the sheriff's deputy, and Dr. Chumley was on his way back from a hunting lease in New Mexico. He was hunting antelope, and he was flying his private aircraft back from it was a lease about an hour and a half west of Albuquerque. Well, he stopped in Amarillo to refuel at what they call general airstrip, and just to, you go in there, you get your gas and fill up your plane, get a hamburger, or, use the restroom and get back up. And so anyway, he refuels. He's at about 6,000 feet, and his plane drops out of the sky like a rock, crashes in the middle of a potato field outside of Shamrock, Texas, which is just about 20 miles west of the Oklahoma-Texas state line in the Panhandle. peculiar things happened after that. He was supposed to bring his family along, but they chose to drive a vehicle that he purchased out there. So they were actually driving back when the plane crash happened. And the county sheriff's investigated and said there was nothing wrong with this plane. They had enough investigators with the FAA out there to say that there's something wrong. This needs to be investigated further. Well, they were called off the crash site. So that's it. You're not going to investigate it. Federal authorities through the FAA were called in and said don't investigate anymore. And the guy that actually owned the airstrip where he refueled said it was the first time in the 28 years that he had owned that airstrip that the FAA did any fuel tests on the gas. Immediately after the crash, within 48 hours, FAA will have a representative to take the top 10 gallons out of the fuel tank. They have to basically analyze whether the fuel was faulty. That never happened. They just let it go. And he says that's not the normal way you investigate a crash. And he was upset because he could have been held liable for being, liable for the crash because of faulty fuel. And he investigated that part. And then you top that on the fact that the sheriff said that there was nothing wrong with the plane. It really draws from the suspect what happened. Well, there was a retired investigator. He worked closely with a lot of these cases, but he also worked for the CIA, and he said that there was probably a corrosive agent on the actual steel cable that could control the rudders in the back of the plane. And one use that in flight, and it snaps, and that's it. But you can't detect that in a crash. That's one thing with the corrosive agents, it's gone, and especially after a horrendous a flame out and the burnout of the plane. So anyway, I hope that's making sense. But Dr. Chumley died in a very mysterious circumstance. Then you have Michael Laudenschlager, who was actually employee of the GSA on the second floor. Right after the bombing happened, he's duking it out. He's literally getting in a fist fight with ATF agents that knew that they were in the building before the bombing happened. Well, he's found dead at his desk. This is a full 3 days after the bombing, after he's pulled away by search and rescue personnel in Oklahoma City, because he was really going to punch it out with agents. And there were several witnesses there. There's no question that even happened. He's found at his desk that following Sunday with a gunshot wound to the back of his head. That never came out in the story. So, I mean, we're dealing with storyline after storyline that's buried in the official story of this. We simply couldn't have brought out in the movie. And I have no qualms about saying this in an interview because people, it happened. This happened in Oklahoma City. These deaths were ignored. They were never investigated.
Wow.
Wow, it just goes so deep all the time. It's like no matter how much you, unravel it, it's just never enough. It just keeps going. It's the same with like 9/11 or any of these. It just continues to go and go.
Stories, right?
Well, I mean, once you start to unravel what really happened, it's just so compartmentalized, and the story just continues to unfold and unfold.
It's never ending. Yeah, definitely.
Long-winded on that, but we could go on for hours on this, and we were able to touch upon just a few of the stories in the movie. The follow-up that we're going to have, we hope to get out by the 13-year or the 18-year anniversary next April, is going to feature extended interviews, things that we couldn't have, just for time's sake, we're not able to include on the first movie. And then there were other cases of like the McVeigh execution and how the state of the execution came about. And we knew the lawyer that handled that on behalf of V.Z. Lawton and Jane Graham, who were actually in the movie. That's a whole other story there. And how John Ashcroft and George Bush just lied through their teeth about why that stay actually took place. They were furious when this lawsuit was filed. They didn't want any stay. They wanted the execution to go through in May 11 of 2001, but they were obligated by the appeals court in Chicago to honor that 30-day stay.
Wow. And the other thing about Timothy McVeigh's execution, they didn't do an autopsy on him, which is against the law, right? I mean, they're supposed to do that after...
Didn't they also want him, cremated, right? They ordered him cremated, or...
In fact, I found out through, talked to Terry Nichols' brother, James, himself and Popovich. Bob Popovich, who was an investigator in Michigan, sued on behalf of Tim McVeigh's dad to get the remains of the body. And the federal government just pretty much told him to take a flying leap, and they handed him cremated remains or what they claimed was Tim McVeigh. They don't know if it was Tim. There were actually 3 decoy hearses pulling out of the death row facility that day just to throw off the press. Well, nobody knows what happened, even if that was Tim's remains or if he's alive. Honestly, as a filmmaker, and I'm saying this as a level head, I honestly don't know if he was killed. Because you have a code of honor, you have a code of ethics when you're dealing with operatives like that. You recruit a certain number of individuals to be Manchurian candidates or special ops who will work for segments of the CIA that simply don't exist on the books. How are you going to continue to recruit people if they're going to kill you? Word gets around pretty fast. So there's always that element. There's always that possibility, and very credible possibility, that Tim McVeigh is alive today.
Oh my gosh. Yeah.
This is worse than like Jason or like Freddy. You know, this is like it really is. Yeah.
Whew. Wow. Well, we could go on forever, but we are out of time here, and we're so grateful to have you on, Chris. I mean, this has been such an honor. We were so excited to have you, and we were so impressed with the film, and just the fact that you were willing to come on our show. We were very honored and excited, and we are really looking forward to your next projects coming up. And so, once again, tell us where we can find the film and what you have coming up.
Well, you could purchase it at Infowars.com, the Infowars store with Alex Jones. He's been very supportive of our efforts, or you can get it on our website at Nobellie.com. And we do appreciate you helping us promote the movie. And we never take these interviews for granted. It's an honor to come on, and thank you for the opportunity.
Well, you're very welcome, and we're very honored as well. And so, in 2013, April of 2013, you just mentioned that you're going to have a follow-up to A Nobel Lie. And when do you expect the documentary about the MK Ultra to be coming out?
We are looking at doing pre-sales around Thanksgiving, and it should be released about the same time as we did the release last year, between the first and second week of December.
Okay. Well,
yeah.
We hope we can have you back.
Yeah, we're definitely looking forward to that for something.
Contact the phone number, and look forward to hearing back from you. And if you wouldn't mind, let me know when you get the show edited. I'd love to get a link to where to post this.
Oh, absolutely! I'll send you the show as soon as we put it up. And we're very grateful to have Chris Emery. A Nobel Lie was the film that we were talking about, and you can, as he said, you can buy it at Nobellie.com or at Infowars.com. Alex Jones is selling it, I think, in a group with some other documentaries that he's promoting. And you guys go on Infowars. You sometimes host the nightly news, correct?
Actually, it was a very a big surprise. We haven't hosted the nightly news. We actually hosted a show, which was a week ago Friday, and we're on there for various interviews relating to the movie and the Colorado shooting and so forth.
Right. Okay. Well, great. So you might find Chris at Infowars, and we thank you once again for being on our show.
Chris.
Thank you. Have a great afternoon, April and Virstyne. Talk to you soon.
Okay, so thanks for listening, and until next time, I'm April Boden. Peace, truth, and love.
I'm Virstyne Henry. Peace, truth, and love. Bye, guys.
Bye-bye.